Hey everyone, Pastor George here with our episode of A New Thing. I hope you're all having a great Thursday, and we are going to talk about something that hopefully will not be super controversial, but you never know because things are so politically charged these days. What are we supposed to do? But I want to start us off by looking at a few verses of scripture. So we're going to look at Isaiah 40, 14, and 15, and 16, and 17. So this is actually Isaiah 40 is pretty famous, especially the beginning. You'll notice that if you go in the text and read it, it's the John the Baptist passage that is quoted around him. But it goes on to talk about the importance of God uh, over and against idols and things like that. So it it's praising God, talking about His character, and in verse 14 it says, "Whom did He consult, and who made Him understand? Who taught Him the path of justice, and taught Him knowledge, and showed Him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are counted as the dust on the scales. Behold, He takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before Him. They are accounted by Him as less than nothing, and emptiness." Interesting thing to talk about with this week, right? So if you're watching it as of release, you know why this is kind of a pertinent thing, because the inauguration just happened, and the whole kerfuffle at the National Cathedral happened, and things like this, right? So politics and religion are actually quite in the news at this point. But I didn't really want to focus on that. I know that everyone is all up in arms about the bishop thing that happened at the Episcopal Church. We're actually going to look at that service, although I'm not going to talk much about the sermon because I, frankly, think it's kind of a waste of breath. I think if you don't like President Trump, you're going to think it was great, and if you like him, you're going to think it's woke tosh or whatever. If you want my own personal opinion about it, you can talk to me, and I would be happy to share it with you. But that's not really my focus today. My focus today is on this. This is a Wikipedia page, all right? It's not always the best tool, but it's the best thing I could find to give kind of a summary. Because I want to talk about kind of the way that we view religion in the United States, especially during times like this. And I think what's interesting is to see what happened at the cathedral, and also to see what happens in the prayers at the inauguration. So I didn't watch the beginning of the inauguration. I caught the end of it because my wife turned it on, and so I came in and ate my lunch and kind of watched the tail end of the president's speech, and then the Mariah Carey's song, or no, not Mariah Carey, Carrie Underwood's song, and that was pretty funny where they had like the awkward silence and stuff like that. I love when just things don't go as planned, and just general, very choreographed events where everyone's supposed to be very like, oh, this is a solemn moment. I think it's funny. And then you had the benediction prayers. So I didn't see the prayers at the beginning. I heard Franklin Graham did one, and I know that and Timothy Dolan, the cardinal from New York, also did one, I believe. And then you had a few other prayers. You had a rabbi, a Protestant guy from Chicago, I think, and you also had a retired Catholic priest who did the benediction prayers. But I want to talk about American civil religion. So this is a concept that I was introduced to when I was studying religion in college, because I took a course on American religion, or religion in the United States. And this is one of the things that we focused on, and I found it so interesting because I had never really heard this talked about before. Um, but it is so clearly the dominant faith stream that it infects our politics. And the reason it's important to talk about is because then we can go, oh, is this what we want to be teaching in pulpits, and should we have this kind of deification of the United States going on, and this mixing of religion and politics in an unhealthy way, or do we want to have a more healthy understanding of how to view the United States, how to view the office of the president, how we should talk to and about the president, because all of this informs our theology. And American civil religion certainly informs the theology of many people in the United States, whether they are aware of it or not. Being raised in the United States, I grew up with this. Like, this is very much a part of like the way that I was. I don't know if knowingly taught, but certainly imbibed the way it was viewed, the relationship between God and the United States, and things like that. Um, and so the Wikipedia page is good for a brief a rundown of this, but I think the picture they have here sums it up better than anything. So, and this is great because this was actually shown on television during the inauguration. Maybe you noticed it. This is at the Capitol building. If you've ever been there before, you may have looked up at the dome and seen this at the top. And this is a mural painted on the top of a dome. And something to note, murals on tops of domes, that is a Christian church thing. So you find that in Eastern Orthodox churches. You find it in basilicas, like some Roman Catholic basilicas, where you have Jesus at the top of the dome looking down. Now, this, I believe, was done in the 1800s, but I could be wrong about that. But you have on the dome, you have this, and this is a mural entitled "The Apotheosis of Washington." What a title, right? Apotheosis. Just to let you know, that's a Greek word for divinization, or becoming a god, right? So this is like Washington becoming a god, which is a crazy thing to think about. Okay, I just want you to let that sink in. That on the capital of our nation, we have George Washington, a man who I have no personal ill will towards. Right, definitely an important person in history and important in the United States, but he's literally becoming a god. You see where the problem is, hopefully, with that. If you don't, then I would refer you to this Isaiah 40, 14 through 17, right? I would refer you there. I don't even think Washington himself would be comfortable with this sort of thing, but this became very much a big deal as the United States was moving on to enshrine these types of things. Now, as a classicist, not a real, like, an armchair one, right? As someone who loves ancient Greece and Rome, there are lots of things I think are really cool, and of course, I believe that the actual artistic thing behind this is very talented, right? Whoever did this is very good, or group of people, whoever it is. But you can see right here, right? So at the center of the dome, we have Washington here, and he's holding a sword, and he's becoming a god, right? Usually in the center of the dome, which was where Christ would be. So you see Washington occupying that position. Above him, you see a bunch of these women. Not really sure what they represent. I'm sure if I counted them out, it would probably be, maybe it's the 13 colonies or something. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right, so that would be like the 13 colonies, maybe, is my guess. And then on his left and right, you have the woman holding the fasces, which is like it's where we get the word fascist from, but it's like what people in ancient Rome would hold when they were when they would follow the consuls around and guard the Senate. So it's kind of like a symbol of justice. And you also have the woman holding a palm branch here, so she's peace. So you kind of justice and peace, and the 13 colonies, and they have the little they have our Latin motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one, right? And Washington is there becoming a god. Around him are a bunch of Greco-Roman gods, kind of showing the different parts of American society. So you have like Neptune here and Aphrodite doing the whole focusing on the marine aspect. You have Athena or Minerva talking to our scientists and philosophers. And you have all sorts of stuff. You have agriculture and industry, and probably this is Hermes, so maybe it's like trade or something like that, right? So it's very pagan. if you didn't get the idea, right? It's kind of mixing a Christian image of apotheosis which did exist before Christianity. You have lots of ancient Greek uh, heroes. Actually, I should say, yeah, ancient Greek heroes and stuff becoming gods. So it's very much drawing on the classical tradition, which America was doing since the founding. That was something that, that's the reason we're a republic. Because the founding fathers were very much like, oh, this is a connection or a callback to Rome, right? That's kind of the idea, and why we have a Capitol building, yeah, spelled the way it is. Like that is a reference to the Roman Republic as well. So very interesting art for sure, right? But communicates something very particular about the United States, which is that God and government uh, have always been intertwined in a way that is very different from how it was in Europe. In Europe, the church was kind of the way that God and government were intertwined. Here, there is no church and state joining at the federal level in the United States' history. There's never been that. At the state level, there has, but never at the federal level. And that means that the God appealed to in the American rhetoric and conscience, is sometimes very different from the God of the Bible, and very easily mappable onto politics. And this is where we come around. But I just want to show you. So you're on this page. I think it's wrong that they have this as an article in just conservatism, because it's not. It's I would say it is a kind of a universal aspect of American life, and we'll look at the prayer service for that clear connection, which is much more liberal in its take. We have someone at the door. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. WB Mason showed up to deliver some stuff. Anyway, so American civil religion. You can see here that there's kind of 14 tenets. A scholar named Bella put this together. And of course, there's lots of debate among students of religion and religious studies and things about how this actually works its way out. But these are kind of the things that they see as importance, right? So filial piety, what that means, that's religious studies talk for showing reverence to parents and people in authority, right? So not an insane thing. That's and these things aren't necessarily not Christian. I'm not saying that. They certainly draw on the Christian tradition, but you'll see that it's very intertwined with how the United States views itself. So there's also reverence to certain sacred texts and symbols, such as the Constitution, the Declaration, the Independence, and the flag. We want to know why flags are in churches. This is the reason why. You don't really see that around the world. The sanctity of American institutions, the belief in God or a deity. So the belief in God is very important. Which God, not as important. And we'll get to that. The idea that rights are divinely given, the notion that freedom comes from God through government, governmental authority comes from God or some higher transcendent authority, the conviction that God can be known through the American experience, that God is the supreme judge, God is sovereign. Again, things that I would agree with, right? That's certainly true. America's prosperity results from God's providence. Again, something that I would agree with. America is a city on a hill or a beacon of hope and righteousness. That goes back to the Pilgrims coming to the United States. Whether or not that they intended for what has happened is another debate. But that was quoted most famously, I believe, by President Reagan in a speech that he gave, and it become very important in how America views itself. The principle of sacrificial death and rebirth. America serves a higher purpose than self-interests. So you'll notice here that some of these here are might go one way in the political spectrum or the other, and this is important, right? This is in Bella's article. It says he further found that there are no statistically significant differences in the amounts of American civil religious language between Democrats and Republicans, incumbents and non-incumbents, nor presidential and vice presidential candidates. pretty interesting. Now, of course, there are people who disagree with this. I'm not saying that this is 1,000% true all of the time, and there isn't a wide variety here, and that you can't find people who don't do this. You certainly can. But when you see stuff like this and you see stuff like this, you go, okay, yeah, I think the general thesis is pretty good. Now, let's turn to this. So this is a service of prayer for the nation. This was what was held at the Washington National Cathedral. You can find the bulletin, which is what I'm looking at, online. They made it available, so you can go through and see it. And it was held at the National Cathedral, which is also called the Cathedral Church of St. Peter and St. Paul. And all the stuff is here. People who played and all that type of stuff. And you go through it. You can also watch it on YouTube. The entire service is available. I'm sure if you know anything about this, you've only seen or heard what the bishop has said, but you can actually watch the whole thing. And I think it's important to know that this is, because it's the Episcopalian Church, and I'm sure if you're aware of the controversy with the sermon, that this is much more on the liberal side of the American political and religious experience. And this is very true in what you see, not only in what she said in her sermon, but also just in the service itself. So it was a multi-faith, interfaith, and I guess, and multi-faith service, where you had people from different religions leading all of the prayers from different traditions and backgrounds and stuff like that. And they also had different music or recitations from non-Christian traditions in the service as well. So it very much is appealing to this idea, right? That like there's one God, and maybe we all have our own different ways of trying to talk to him. But we can all gather together and pray to this one God for the nation. And while it is a Christian service, I don't want to take away from that, right? Like it does say God and Jesus, your son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. There is things that go on there, but they also sing, the Star Spangled Banner, for instance. And then you have a rabbi who read, and you have the Jewish call to prayer, where a woman sang the Shema, I believe it was. But you also have people like, and I don't want to I'm going to mispronounce it, and I don't mean to, but you also have like Mehta Bhagwat, who's a Vedanta teacher from the Chinmaya Mission Washington Regional Center, so a Hindu, right, who is praying. You have a reading from the Quran there. And he read this, and then you had is it the Adhan? Is that what it's called? Man, that's so embarrassing. It's usually done by a muezzin. It's the Muslim call to prayer. It's probably actually what I would say is a call to prayer. The other things that are mentioned, like a call to prayer is a Muslim thing, so it's like saying like a Jewish call to prayer. It's not really not how I would describe a recitation of the Shema. And so you have a reading from the Quran, which I would simply, if I was president or I was asked to do a service like this for a president, I would just make it a Christian thing. You have Mormons who are there, right? So you have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are present. You have Buddhists. You have Sikhs. And again, I'm not opposed to these people being in the United States or being able to worship in the United States. Kind of the one thing that I was surprised about is that you see that there might not be a knowledge of religion or religious ideas. Like if I was Trump, I probably just never would have came to this sort of thing. I feel like he kind of left himself open for what happened. You have like Catholic hymns being sung, right? So you have the Ave Maria. Of course, then you had Matthew. This was the Christian reading from Matthew 7:24-29. And then you had this woman sing, and she was actually quite good. I listened to it. Again, I wouldn't call what is that? Laus Trinitati, which is a hymn by Hildegard of Bingen, a Christian call to prayer, but it sounded really nice. So I'm not going to complain about that. Then you had a bunch more prayers, again, from various different communities. You had God of Our Fathers, again, a very nationalistic hymn. It's in our hymnal. And then you had the sermon, and that's where the sermon is like what everyone focuses on. And the only thing I'm not going to talk about that, but only to say like this is just an appeal through like American civil religion to Trump to say this is what it should be done, right? There's a continual appeal to God again and again and again. You had the Lord's Prayer and more prayers and hymns and America the Beautiful, right? I think the only non-America centered prayer is Great is Thy Faithfulness, which is, of course, a classic. I don't want to misspeak here, but we had Star Spangled Banner. We had the healing of the nations. I don't know that one, but that seems like a Christian one. So you had two. So I did misspeak. You had one at the beginning and one at the end. But like something to note is that the Holy Spirit is mentioned only one time. Here you do have spirit, a lot of spirit things, but that's a lot more generic, right? You have Jesus mentioned. I believe I counted. Yeah, I did 10 times, and then of course just God. God as a concept is applied a lot of times, right? So you have a lot of you do have when Christians speak an appeal to the Christian deity, Jesus Christ, right? Yahweh incarnate, but you don't have. But that's not necessarily the focus, and also there's a lot of I would say obfuscating the differences between the two because it's supposed to serve the most important purpose of hey, as Americans we all worship God and we should all and it doesn't really matter which God that is, and so not necessarily a surprise for me when this sort of stuff happens. It's mostly for me it's less upsetting what people say, more upsetting that there isn't such a distinction, and I think honestly that actually makes if you're a fan of what the bishop said, I actually think that makes her appeal weaker when you do stuff like this. I think it's good to from a Christian perspective say this is what Jesus says and the Christian religion says. Like I don't care what others say, this is what we say, and have that more strong statement of faith that could be a part of it. That actually might be more effective because the problem is when you end up kind of reducing religion to this generic thing, it's not gonna people aren't really gonna take it as seriously as they might if it was their own conviction being addressed there. I also wanted to look at briefly, very briefly, the transcripts from some of the prayers, which are found online. They did have. I couldn't find a transcript of actually the bishop's sermon. So you had a few people. Yeah, so did have Cardinal Dolan, and you had his prayers. And then you had at the end you had a rabbi. You had Lorenzo Sewell and Reverend Father Frank Mann. So you have Jew, Protestant, and Catholic at the end, and here, right? There's always going to be politics in this sort of thing because it's a political nature. And the ones who prayed at Trump's inauguration were those are the ones that if you're a Trump supporter, you're going to enjoy a lot more because they were a lot more laudatory of Trump rather than kind of like criticizing him, which is what happened at the prayer service at the National Cathedral, right? So you have like lots of things in here, and then lots of appeals, right? So here the rabbi says, unite us around our foundational biblical values of life and liberty, of service and sacrifice, and especially of faith and morality. which George Washington, see the appeal, called the indispensable supports of American prosperity. Not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to appeal to Washington. I'm just trying to show you guys the connections that are being made here. And of course, he also speaks about Israel and the Middle East and things like that. His main appeal is to the Jeremiah passage where he says, "Blessed is the one who trusts in God," and that's kind of connected to what we have in our coins, our money, right? And then you have Lorenzo Sewell come up, and he's a lot more. This calls him spirited, right? He's from a non-denominational church, and he gives a prayer where he, and this again drew heavily from Martin Luther King Jr. He pretty much copies a lot of what Martin Luther King Jr. says, except he tones down some of the parts that have to do kind of with the civil rights movement of the time, and just uses the generic kind of way it was delivered, that some of his sermons were delivered back in the day. Here, and again, these are a lot more laudatory, right? We're so grateful that you gave our 45th and now our 47th president a millimeter miracle. I think that's referring to the bullet that almost killed him, which is a good thing that didn't happen, because that's bad, right? And these are a lot more, I would say, open to obvious Christian symbolism in some ways, right? So it says, like, Heavenly Father, in the name of Jesus, we are so grateful today that you will use our 47th president, so we would sing with new meaning. And then this is all from Martin Luther King right here. The whole Wet Freedom Ring from different places. I was surprised he said Stone Mountain, because Stone Mountain in Georgia has a bunch of Confederates on it. But kind of an interesting choice, and that's why Martin Luther King said it, because it's kind of like like going like, even from these places, he mentions, like, I think, like the Bloody Hills of Alabama and stuff like that, right? So it's a lot more pointed in the original Martin Luther King speech, but either way, and he again ends it the way that King ended one of his speeches. And then you had Reverend Frank Mann, and he kind of gave the most normal one of the three, I think. A lot more of what you would expect, kind of a generic appeal. But he ends by quoting Trump, which was kind of interesting, which I had never heard this before, but it's not entirely bad. And then so it's just this idea that there's a continual destiny that's carved between the United States and God, in a way that is unique. And of course, like, many countries do this. This is not just, the United States alone does this sort of thing. But right, this is a blending of politics and religion, right? So and you'll see that just in the way that these things are talked about. If you read this, you'll see lots of appeals to what I would say are more left-leaning causes in the United States. You saw that in the sermon, for instance. Here, in these prayers, you're going to see a lot more of a focus on kind of conservative or right-leaning causes, and both of these things are going to be claimed to be done in God's name. And sometimes these things are mutually exclusive, right? And this is why it's difficult when we begin mixing our politics with our religion. Sometimes we do it very obviously, sometimes we do it subtly. I just think the important thing to note, as I see many of you posting on Facebook, right, or talking about this and things like that, to be very aware of your own biases and convictions and this sort of thing. Because, and I say this very humbly, as someone who's dealt with that before, I don't think you're always aware of them. And I think we harm our witness when we go one way or another too deeply. I think that we should be able to find fault in both of these things, and also things to praise in both of these things. Rarely do we find things that are 1,000% wrong, 100% wrong, even if with people that we disagree with. So I would caution you, if you got excited this week, to see, am I doing this because I'm a Christian and that's why I'm excited, or is it American civil religion and my party is the one who's being theosicized or deified in this moment, and that's why I enjoy what this religious person had to say to or against the president. Got to be careful, people. Got to be careful, because remember, God doesn't care about the United States. That's the ultimate point, right? He does. He does care, like in the sense of he cares for the people. He wants us to do good, things like that. But what all the nations are is nothing before him. They are counted by God as less than nothing and emptiness. Less than nothing. Remember that. All right, you guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I will see you on Sunday for worship. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and peace out.